Greetings, administration, faculty, and staff on this Founders Day, this January 20th, 2021, a day that is going to be like no other January 20th, I am sure, with days preceding it that have been like no other in our country. Who would have thought we would be in this place? But it makes me think about the Reverend Martin Luther King and his visit here in 1966. And I feel like for today's moments of thinking and pondering, I'm going to leave you with his closing remarks of his speech that he did here at IWU. He says, "May I say in conclusion that in spite of the difficulties ahead, and in spite of the fact that we must work hard, I still have faith in the future. And I still have faith in America because I love America and believe that we will continue to build a coalition of conscience that one day will solve our problems." We sing a little song in our movement, and it has been guiding our faith. Sometimes we've been facing hooded perpetrators of violence. Sometimes we face jeering mobs. Sometimes we face dogs and the gushing waters from fire hoses. Sometimes in crowded jail cells, we join hands and sing a hymn. Sometimes in just open mass meetings, we could sing it as a hymn of faith. We shall overcome, we shall overcome. Deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome. And somehow I believe this because the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. We shall overcome because Carlyle is right. No lie can live forever. We shall overcome because William Cullen Bryant is right. Truth-crushed earth shall rise again. We shall overcome because James Russell Lowell is right. Truth forever on the scaffold, wrong forever on the throne. Yet the scaffold sways the future, and behind the dim unknown standeth God within the shadow, keeping watch. And so with this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of siblinghood. With this faith, we will be able to speed up that day when all God's children, black men, white men, black women, white women, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics will be able to join hands and sing in the words of that old Negro spiritual, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last. Yes, community of IWU, these words were spoken here in 1966. We have been part of a history that has changed the world. Let us continue to be part of the future and make it better. May it be so.
Hello, and welcome to Founders Day. The founding of Illinois Wesleyan University in 1850 was part of a larger cultural movement in America in the mid-19th century, fueled by religious piety, civic pride, and a deep respect for education. All across America, but particularly in the upper Midwest, it seemed that every community and religious denomination wanted to found a seat of higher learning. Illinois has more than 50 small private colleges, and you'll find that the majority of them came into being around this time. I mentioned three motives for this burgeoning of colleges and universities. First, religious piety. America's original colonial colleges had a primary objective of training ministers. Educating men, of course, for a religious calling remained a central motive for college founding in the 19th century. Illinois Wesleyan's story is interesting because it was founded as a Methodist institution, but the founding fathers were not all Methodists. 12 were Methodist ministers, but 18 were not. In fact, in our founding document, the institution's title is Illinois University. Wesleyan is inserted above the line as an edit in the handwritten text. Second, civic pride. Early records about the university's founding show an enormous pride and confidence in the anticipated importance of Central Illinois. Destiny seems to point out this valley as the depository of the great heart of the nation. On a somewhat less grand scale, the founders clearly wanted to elevate Bloomington by the founding of a college. As one wrote, "We cannot begin too soon." Third, respect for education. On the one hand, America has always had a tradition of anti-intellectualism. But on the other hand, from its earliest days, there has been a belief in the power and the necessity of education. The founders of the Massachusetts Bay Colony established Harvard within 9 years of arriving in America. They saw it as one of the most important institutions to create in this new country. The founders of Illinois Wesleyan stand in that same tradition. There were fits and starts in our founding. It was not a smooth road. Hopes would rise and then be dashed. But the founders persevered because they felt that a seat of advanced learning was so important to the destiny of this region. I emphasize these three motives that contributed to the founding of Illinois Wesleyan because it is important not to lose sight of them in our contemporary environment when all three may seem to be in short supply. But faith, care for the community, and belief in the power of education stand at our core. And in recognizing Founders Day, we celebrate those values. The Founders Day we observe today was established by the Board of Trustees in 1913. In recent years, we have linked Founders Day to our annual intellectual theme, which draws together guest speakers and courses to address an overarching issue of importance. This year's annual theme is Health, Healing, and Humanity. While this theme was chosen before 2020, it obviously could not be more relevant today, as we see these three inextricably intertwined in the context of the coronavirus pandemic. I want to turn now to introduce our speaker for today's Founders Day, Dr. Stephanie White, whose experience and expertise are uniquely suited to bring us insights on this theme. We regret very much not being able to hold this event in person, and I want to especially note that Dr. White has generously agreed not only to deliver this address, but she will also be participating in Professor Greg Shaw's American Healthcare Policy course and delivering a presentation on the intersection of Blackness and U.S. healthcare. That's really going above and beyond for the Titan community. I want to thank you so much for giving us so much of your time, Dr. White. I hope that many of you have taken the opportunity to read Dr. White's impressive biography. Dr. Stephanie White is a 1991 graduate of Illinois Wesleyan with a degree in biology. She received her MD from the Chicago Medical School, now Rosalind Franklin University of Medicine and Science, and she completed a pediatric residency at Louisiana State University Medical Center in New Orleans. Dr. White also holds an MBA in Public and Nonprofit Management from St. Xavier University. She has been honored with distinguished alumni awards from both the Chicago Medical School and Illinois Wesleyan. Currently, she is a Senior Clinical Solutions Medical Director for Aetna Medicaid, with particular responsibility for Florida, Kentucky, and Louisiana. Prior to joining Aetna, she served as the first ever Chief Health Officer for Chicago Public Schools. She also spent a decade serving as Medical Director of Mobile Care Chicago, caring for children with asthma in Chicago's most underserved neighborhoods. Dr. White, your experience and commitments could not be more relevant to our campus theme and to what we are seeing in our country today as we wrestle with the COVID pandemic. I look forward very much to hearing your remarks.
Hello, I'm Dr. Stephanie White, Illinois Wesleyan, class of 1991, and distinguished alumna from 2015. It is a pleasure to be with you today to celebrate Illinois Wesleyan's 171st Founders Day. President Nugent, thank you so much for the invitation and the distinct honor of delivering today's address. When we first spoke, we anticipated that I'd be able to join in on campus and it would be a traditional convocation. Of course, pandemic being as it is, it has disrupted all of that. And we come together today now in a virtual format. And I'm thankful for all of you who are able to join today. This is also a great year for me because I'm celebrating my 30th reunion. So it's my 30th reunion year. I can't believe so much time has passed. I'd also be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that it's Inauguration Day, and our country will be swearing in its 46th president, along with the vice president on this historic day, the first African American and the first female vice president for the United States of America. So it's historic all the way around. So I come before you today to reflect on our theme, health, healing, and humanity. My topic for discussion is COVID-19, the great disruptor. Now, my grandmother, God rest her soul, had an expression. If I said it once, I've said it 1,000 times. And for me, that resonates so much because in 2020, that was my mantra. COVID-19, the great disruptor. And if I said it once, I truly said it 1,000 times. And I thought it would be a wonderful springboard for our conversation today. Now, I need to let you know, this discussion is not going to be heavy laden with data and statistics. It will not be overrun with the latest medical research and what was most recently published, but it'll be more of a reflection on what have been some of the repercussions of the disruption that the pandemic has been in all of our lives. And it'll allow for us a moment of reflection and hopefully introspection to where we can maybe even find a call to action for what we can do to make things better, whether on a personal front, maybe that's the reflection of how can I be a better person coming out of this, or on a more broader scale. What action steps can I take? What call to action? How can I get involved? What can I do to make this place a better one when I leave and depart it than how I found it? And so if I do a good job, maybe I'll motivate and inspire you along the way. If not, maybe I'll just amuse you. We'll see how it goes. So 2020, what a year, right? So we had sheltering in place, masks, social distancing, work at home, schools that went to remote. We had businesses that were temporarily shut down, some that were permanently closed. We had a complete disruption of how our home life, our work life, school, how we worshiped, how we did our extracurriculars, if there were extracurriculars, sports, how, we traveled, if we could travel, where we did grocery shopping, if we could grocery shop, how we interfaced socially, how we spent time with our friends, our family, if we even frequented the local establishments in our neighborhood. everything was turned on its ear with the pandemic, and not just for short periods of time, for months. We're still in a limited interface for what we normally would do. And with that, there's been a great impact to all of our lives. Additionally, if we look at how our virtual presence has changed, we're doing our Founders Day conversation and convocation virtually, right? We are having all of our meetings almost in the workplace are on some sort of virtual platform, right? If it's not Zoom, it's WebEx, it's Skype, it's being held in Teams. If you don't hear once or twice a day, you're on mute. You know, your day's not complete without that, right? Or yeah, or even it's extended to your family life now, right? How many gatherings are you having? Family Zoom meetings, family happy hours, or paint and sips, or all sorts of social events and interactions. In order for us to keep in contact and be in touch with people, we are now doing them on a virtual platform. Businesses have had to take their platforms virtually to sustain themselves in a manner where they would typically gather in an establishment. They're doing them virtually now. So, evolve or die, right? That's a part of life, but a part of the pandemic has forced our hand truly to evolve and be creative, be innovative. And so that's a part of the disruption that we are experiencing as well. So when we think about that and you can pick a descriptor, whether it's change, whether it's growth, whether it's improvement, or just evolution, that's a part of what we've seen with the pandemic. And one of the areas that was also impacted has been health, and in particularly looking at health from the aspect of some of the disparities that lies therein. When we look at the social determinants of health and we look at things that influences the health of an individual or a population of people, these determinants are things that impact the availability or access to things like quality education, high quality education, good and nutritious food, safe and reliable transportation, safe and affordable housing, culturally sensitive healthcare providers, clean water and air that's not polluted, the ability to have health insurance. These are all things that are considered social determinants of health and can impact the health of a population. And we see them being factors when we talk about healthcare disparities. And JAMA, the Journal for the American Medical Association, reported early on in the spring of 2020 about disparities that there were cropping up as it pertained to COVID-19. And amongst them, and I'll just note a couple to set the stage, were if you compared predominantly Black counties with predominantly white counties, you saw a threefold increase in the infection rate in predominantly Black counties. You saw a sixfold increase in the death rate in predominantly Black counties. If you were Black or poor, you were more likely to be hospitalized. And if you were poor, you were more likely to require an intensive care unit stay when you were hospitalized. So you're more severely ill. And we know that there's healthcare disparities. Healthcare disparities have been studied, that there's a disproportionate amount of ill effects that occur in certain demographics. So in a study from 2012, done by the DHS Agency for Healthcare Research, 191 touch points on health were examined. And what it found was that in 43% of these factors that were taken a look at, Blacks received far less care than their white counterparts. So only in 18% of these measures did Blacks receive better care. So 43% of the time of these 191 measures, Blacks received worse care than their white counterparts. We know that 13% of African Americans comprise, our US population is comprised of 13% African Americans, but only 6% of our physicians in the United States are African American. We know that for the last 40 years, the number of African American males that are applying to and being accepted in medical school has been on a decline. We know that over the last 30 years, the number of African American medical students has increased. We see that predominantly that they're female, however. And in that same 30-year period, there's been a 20% decline in the number of African American males that are in medical school. We see that in 2015, a report showed that 41% of African American males were accepted to medical school. And that was the lowest rate of acceptance for any across any gender or racial demographic. So of all the races and genders, if you looked at them through the demographics, that was the lowest one. So again, if I think about social determinants of health and having a culturally sensitive healthcare provider, and going to be able to see someone who looks like you and you feel comfortable there, and studies do show that when you're seeing a provider who has that commonality with you, you tend to receive better care. That's a factor. So it becomes a disparity. We have a gap that needs to be addressed and solved for. When we talk about actual health care, studies show that African American women are 3 to 4 times likely to die from pregnancy-related complications than their white counterparts. They're 3 to 4 times more likely to suffer a severe complication from pregnancy than white women. They're less likely to have common things that impact them medically be studied and have research pertain to have their conditions researched. So, for example, fibroids, which can affect up to 60% of African American women, especially as they age, there's no studies being addressed to that, or very limited studies being placed on that, but other conditions that are impacting other demographics at lower rates get a great deal of research put into it. Research dollars placed into that. And then African American women are underrepresented in clinical trials. So that's just me level setting for context around when we talk about disparities, when we talk about social determinants of health, things that are factors, and then we talk about some of the context of what we see already and know about some of where the disparities are. And then we hear the little blurb about how that JAMA released in the spring about how things were shaken out with COVID. There's some disruption. Here's some opportunity here. So let's talk about these disparities, and let's talk about, now we're in a pandemic, how do we address this? How do we address some of the issues so that this is not impacting us as a society, and definitely not us as a certain demographic or a certain sector of our society is being impacted? How do we make certain that everyone is getting the appropriate care that they need, the humanity of it all, right? So I'll start again. I started with these stats just to level set. And I think when you think about what some of the civil activities that occurred in 2020 and some of the lows that we hit last year, from a civil standpoint, if we think about the George Floyd tragedy, when we think about the Breonna Taylor case, I think it kind of set the stage for many of us to feel a sense of, I'm not just going to take this anymore, a sense of intolerance. And we saw that by how many people across how many states took to the street in these protests to say, no, we have to do something about this. This isn't right. We need to be having a discussion. There are some things systemically and inherently wrong that we need to correct and address. And I will say, for probably the first time in my lifetime, I've seen a discussion around racism and around the systemic nature of it, around implicit bias, and around the need to be anti-racist that's happening and occurring with a group of people that are diverse, that are actively engaged, that are listening and learning and really trying to move the needle around this, and with a group of allies who say, well, I'm not African American, but I understand why this needs to be a cause. I understand where things are flawed here. I understand where privilege sits. I understand where I can do better. I understand where we all have a collaborative role here. We all have our own responsibility, and we should all be picking up this torch to make our country, our society better. And so that's been something I believe that the pandemic helped foster with its own disruption. It existed, and I think it created a wonderful climate for these discussions and to move them forward. So that's me speaking in a broader sense. I want to give you a few examples and then send you on your way. The first example, picture it, 30 years ago. I'm a undergrad student here, my last year of undergrad. I'm looking to go to medical school. I'm going to go into a pre-matriculation program, though, being offered by the medical school. This is an opportunity for me to take classes with the medical students, show that I can do the work, then petition for advanced standing in the next year's admission class. I share this with my advisor. My advisor at the time had been my advisor for 4 years. He was the chairman of the biology department, and he was the president the head of the pre-medical advisory committee. I let him know that I have this opportunity. So he says, well, did you get a letter saying that you admitted? I was like, no, they didn't give me a letter, but they gave me a verbal acceptance, told me that I was the citizen. He said, okay, well, I'll send a letter. So I'll send you a letter from the pre-medical advisory committee and you let me know what they say. And I said, okay, but they told me I'm in. So I'm 21. The handshake is good for me. So he comes to me, it's the last few weeks of school, about 3 or 4 times. He's come by the micro lab. Steph, have you heard? Did you get in? Because I sent the letter. Did you get in? And I was like, no, doc, I haven't heard yet. But the letter, I think, is really a formality. I already told me that I'm in. Well, you haven't heard anything in writing, have you? Nope, I haven't. But they told me I got in. So we had that interface, like I said, about 3 or 4 times. Graduate. It's now the summer. I'm in the dean's office at the medical school with the head of the pre-matriculation program and 7 other students from the U of I who are going to be starting in this program. Our decision point is whether we're starting in the summer course or we're going to start a little later in late summer, early fall in a different course. And the leader of the director of the pre-matriculation program says to me in front of the dean and these 7 people that I don't know, sister, let me tell you, I got your letter from Illinois Wesleyan, right? Yeah, I got that letter. Let me tell you what they said. I do not recommend Stephanie White for this program. She will never withstand the rigors of a medical education. I'm mortified. This is in front of the dean, in front of these people that I don't know. And I don't even know how to process that. 1, I think I'm not going to get into this program now. 2, I'm crushed because this was my advisor for the last 4 years who I thought had my back and was championing me. And literally, he just knifed me. I don't even think I knew how to process it, but I knew I needed to keep my face straight. And I'm certain it wasn't, because you can see I'm pretty expressive. I'm certain that it wasn't. And yeah, that's what happened to me. Fast forward, because I'm a doctor now, so it's a happy ending, right? So fast forward, I graduate and I send him a wonderful announcement of my graduation. I put my little picture in there, a little announcement note that says, guess who withstood the rigors of a medical education, because he was still at the university at the time. And then I'll fast forward again to when my medical school honored me with a Distinguished Alumni Award. And the very same dean presented the award to me, and he shared his version of that story and talked about how that letter infuriated him so much. And that when he was talking with the director of the pre-matriculation program, that he was like, we absolutely need to admit her and give her this opportunity. That's why the program was designed of and by itself. But just the fact that the person who was in place to facilitate my education and to shepherd me along and provide that type of guidance to help me realize what were my goals and my dreams would try to sabotage me like that. Yeah, but there was a happy ending. My second example, I was a resident and I'm a migraine sufferer, and I was on day 2 of a migraine. I maxed out all my medications and my headache wasn't getting any better. And a colleague of mine came, fellow resident of mine came and took me to the emergency room. And because I was a resident, I didn't want to go to any emergency room where I was going to see a medical student or another resident. I just wanted to deal with the attending. So we picked one that wasn't in our system. And I get there, the nurse triages me, puts me in a dark room. I'm in pain. And the doctor walks in, and the first thing he says when he flips on the bright light is, "I don't give narcotics for migraine pain." I'm in pain. I'm scrunching my eyes because of the bright light. And I'm like, okay, I don't care what you give. I just want the pain to go away. And that doctor repeated at least 3 or 4 times that he doesn't give narcotics for migraine pain. So I'm realizing that he thinks I'm there for drugs. And I'm like, dude, my head hurts. And so I share that I'm a physician, that I'm a resident at LSU, all of this. And his demeanor towards me doesn't really change. And he did go and get the book of the PDR about this thick, had fine print that with my migraine, I couldn't read what it said anyway, and wanted to point out to me what it said about particular medicine that I was taking and that it was okay for me to take another one, and then tell me what he was going to give me, and which he did. And a couple of hours later, I felt better and I was left to go home. But I felt horrible. As someone who was ill, seeking care, I felt like I was treated like a flea-ridden dog that no one wanted to touch, and I didn't deserve to be there. And it was I couldn't put it to words. I was happy to feel better. And I went to talk to my chief resident, who was a white male, about it the next day. And he had choice words for that doctor and how he treated me, and suggested that I write the president of the medical staff and let them know what happened. And I tried to craft that letter, and I figured I came there with pain, I got treated, and I left better. How do I contextualize? But he was mean to me, and I think he was mean to me because of how I looked, right? That was my struggle. But that's another example for you. And the final one is just something that happened recently to someone who's in my social network, or who was in my social network. It was for a doctor in Indiana who just this past few weeks ago had COVID. And she was ill, and she went to the hospital. And while she was in the hospital and, sharing with her medical history, letting them know that the treatment she was getting, she was not feeling any better, and she was in pain, and she was asking for additional care, and she was not being well received by the clinical staff or the medical staff. I mean, she asked to speak to the chief of staff of the hospital, like, hello, I'm sick, I'm here, I understand what the disease process is, I'm not feeling any better, these are what my symptoms are. Can I get A, B, C, and D? Can you do more? And they really ignored her, to the point that she went to social media. She went to a social media platform to address what was going on. And in one of those ways is in a doctor group that she was discussing her care. And she ended up being discharged. And within 12 hours, she had a fever that was 103. She had a pneumonia. She had, all these other findings that were when she went to another facility, and they actually treated her, but she did worse and had to go into the intensive care unit, and she subsequently expired. She lost her life. A medical professional, someone who went to seek medical care, who could advocate for themselves, who understood the medical process, and had a horrible outcome. Now, I didn't read the medical chart, but the first thing I always think about when I interface with the medical field as a medical professional is I think about those I care for or have cared for who can't articulate for themselves, who can't use the medical jargon, who don't understand the process, or when you say a certain lab value to me, what that means. So if I'm here and I'm advocating for myself and I understand the disease process and I'm at an impasse, what about the lay person? And my heart always bleeds for that. And for certain, it bleeds for this African-American female physician who sought medical care in this pandemic times while afflicted by the pandemic and ultimately succumbed to COVID-19. So when we talk about healthcare disparities, when we talk about things that the research has already talked about as far as African Americans not receiving the same caliber of care, when it talks about women not receiving the same, African American women not receiving the same caliber of care, when we talk about social determinants of health, so your health outcomes and having culturally sensitive healthcare providers, there is a great deal of opportunity that this disruption has unveiled. So, what are some of the solutions? So individually, I think we reflect as individuals where we fall on this continuum, right? Are we exhibiting anti-racist behavior? Because if you aren't being anti-racist, you got to take a closer look, right? What are your opportunities? Are you being an ally? Are you championing the cause, whether or not you're African American, whether or not you're the particular entity? Are you championing the cause? Whether or not you're the particular demographic being targeted, are you championing the cause? And this could be whether we're talking about, in this case, we're talking about healthcare. It could be immigration. It could be whatever the cause is. Are you championing it as we take a look at it from a broader sense and from a humanistic approach, right? And then I think as we move forward, we look at institutions and if we look at the healthcare institution, we look at clearly training around diversity, inclusion, but in particular, implicit bias, anti-racism, those things that need to be embedded and indoctrinated as we go along our medical career and pathway, as we continue our continuing medical education. There's opportunity to ensure that culturally sensitive awareness training is occurring, that we're not applying any implicit bias, that we are acting in a manner that's anti-racist, that we're caring, sensitive, and compassionate when we take care of our patients. There are opportunities all the way around, but the reality is, in order to impact the system, you have to start with the individual, because the individual empowers the system. So I'll wrap my talk there. Thank you for the opportunity to come before you today. Thank you for listening. I hope something that I said was inspiring or motivating. I would be remiss as a medical provider, as a healthcare provider, as a physician, if I didn't talk to you about you doing your part to flatten the curve, right? So that includes wearing a mask, social distancing, limiting group interactions, and when the vaccine is available to you, taking it for both your safety and protection and that of others. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day, and congratulations, Illinois Wesleyan, on 171 years.
From hearts of flame